In the frozen forests of Eastern Europe, where death whispered through every snowflake and survival meant becoming something you never imagined, a young woman would prove that the greatest weapon isn't always the biggest gun, it's the will to fight when everyone expects you to fall. They called her weak. They said she belonged in the kitchen, not the battlefield. Military commanders rolled their eyes when she requested sniper training. Fellow soldiers snickered behind her back, placing bets on how quickly she'd crack under pressure. Even her own family questioned whether a girl barely out of her teens could handle the brutal reality of war. But, in 18 perfect shots, she would silence every doubter. In stopping 60 enemy soldiers with precision that defied belief, she would rewrite the rules of warfare itself. This isn't just a story about a sniper, it's about the moment when underestimation becomes the enemy's deadliest mistake. What happens when the person everyone dismisses becomes the one person who can save them all? What happens when mockery transforms into legend, and a young woman's determination rewrites history itself? The answer lies in the snow-covered battlefields where heroes are born not from strength, but from the refusal to surrender when the world expects you to quit. The morning Elena Petrov decided to change the course of history started like any other in the small Ukrainian village of Biela Tserkva. The year was 1941, and the world was burning. German forces had swept across Eastern Europe like a plague, leaving destruction in their wake. But, on this particular morning, as Elena hung laundry on the line behind her family's modest cottage, she had no idea that by evening, her entire life would be transformed forever. Elena was 22 years old, with dark hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that held a determination her neighbors often mistook for stubbornness. She was the eldest daughter of Mikhail Petrov, a factory worker who had spent his life building machinery, and Anna Petrov, a seamstress whose delicate hands could create beautiful clothes from the simplest materials. The family was neither wealthy nor poor, they existed in that comfortable middle ground where dreams were modest and expectations practical. The sound of approaching vehicles shattered the morning peace. Elena looked up from the laundry basket to see a convoy of Soviet military trucks rumbling down the village's main road. Dust clouds followed in their wake, and the mechanical roar of engines echoed off the stone walls of nearby houses. Neighbors emerged from their homes, wiping flour from their aprons and setting down garden tools to watch the unusual sight. Elena's younger brother Victor came running around the corner of the house, his 15-year-old legs carrying him faster than his common sense. His eyes were bright with excitement as he pointed toward the convoy. "Elena, look! The army is here. They're setting up a recruitment station in the town square." Victor's voice cracked with adolescent enthusiasm. Like many boys his age, he had grown up hearing stories of military glory and heroic battles. The reality of war, the blood, the terror, the impossible choices, remained abstract concepts in his young mind. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and studied the convoy with growing unease. She had heard the stories from refugees who had fled westward, carrying tales of German brutality and the desperate need for every able-bodied person to defend their homeland. Unlike her brother, Elena understood that war wasn't an adventure, it was survival. "Victor, go inside and help mother with the bread," Elena instructed, her voice carrying the authority that came naturally to an older sister who had helped raise her siblings. But Victor was already running toward the town square, drawn by the magnetic pull of military excitement. Elena sighed and abandoned her laundry, following at a more measured pace. As she walked through the village streets, she noticed how other families were reacting to the military presence. Some mothers clutched their sons protectively, while fathers stood straighter, their faces reflecting pride mixed with worry. The town square buzzed with activity. Soviet officers in olive green uniforms had set up tables and were speaking with young men from the village. Elena recognized most of the faces, boys she had grown up with, played with as children, and watched become men. Now they were signing papers that would send them to fight an enemy many of them had never seen. Elena positioned herself near the fountain in the center of the square, observing the recruitment process. The officers were professional but urgent in their manner. One particularly stern-looking colonel with graying hair addressed the growing crowd. "Citizens of Biela Tserkva," the colonel announced, his voice carrying across the square, "the motherland calls upon every loyal Soviet citizen to defend our soil against fascist invaders. The German army believes they can crush our spirit and enslave our people. They believe we will surrender without a fight.
Today, we prove them wrong.
A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elena noticed how the colonel's words affected different people differently. The young men stood taller, their chests puffed with newfound purpose. The older men nodded grimly, remembering perhaps another war, another time when their country had called them to serve. The women, the mothers, wives, and daughters watched with expressions that mixed pride with an ancient fear that only women who send their loved ones to war can truly understand. We need soldiers, yes, the colonel continued, but we also need support personnel. Cooks, medics, communications operators, and supply staff. Every person who serves brings us closer to victory. Elena found herself stepping forward before her conscious mind had made the decision. Something deep within her, a combination of patriotic duty and personal conviction, pushed her toward the recruitment table. She had always been practical, always been the one in her family who solved problems rather than simply worrying about them. If her country needed help, if her village needed protection, then she would provide it. "Excuse me," Elena said to the sergeant sitting behind the nearest table. The man looked up, his weathered face showing mild surprise at being addressed by a young woman. "Yes, miss? Are you here on behalf of a brother or husband?" The sergeant's assumption was natural and understandable. In 1941, women rarely approached military recruitment tables for themselves. "No," Elena replied calmly. "I'm here to volunteer myself." The sergeant's expression shifted from surprise to confusion, and, then, to what might have been amusement. He glanced at his colleagues at nearby tables, and Elena caught the subtle eye roll he directed toward another officer. "Miss, we appreciate your patriotic spirit," the sergeant said, his tone becoming slightly condescending, "but the army needs soldiers, not what?" Elena interrupted, her voice steady but firm. "Not people willing to serve their country? Not individuals who can think clearly under pressure? Not citizens who want to defend their homes?" The conversation was beginning to attract attention from other people in the square. Elena noticed her brother Victor watching from a few feet away, his mouth slightly open in surprise at his sister's boldness. Other villagers were turning to listen, their conversations growing quieter as they focused on this unexpected confrontation. "Miss," the sergeant tried again, his patience clearly wearing thin, "the military is no place for a young lady. Perhaps you could volunteer with the Red Cross, or help with supply efforts in the rear areas. There are many ways to serve without what? Without actually fighting?" Elena's voice carried a hint of steel that surprised even her. "Sergeant, with respect, you don't know what I'm capable of. You don't know my skills, my determination, or my commitment to defending this country. You're dismissing me based on assumptions." Colonel Volkov, the gray-haired officer who had addressed the crowd, approached the table. Elena could see that he had been watching the exchange with interest. His withered face bore the scars and lines of someone who had seen real combat, real leadership decisions, and real consequences. "What's the situation here, Sergeant Kozlov?" the colonel asked. "Sir, this young woman wants to volunteer for active military service," Sergeant Kozlov explained, his tone suggesting that he found the entire situation mildly absurd. Colonel Volkov studied Elena carefully. His eyes weren't dismissive like the sergeant's, they were evaluating, measuring, trying to see beyond surface appearances to the person underneath. "What's your name, miss?" the colonel asked. "Elena Petrov, sir." "And why do you want to join the military, Elena Petrov?" Elena took a deep breath. She knew that her answer would be crucial, not just for her own future, but potentially for how these men viewed women's capabilities in general. "Sir, the Germans are coming to destroy everything we've built, everything we love. They want to take our freedom, our homes, our families. When something threatens what you love, you fight back. You don't hide behind others and hope someone else will handle the problem. You step forward and do what needs to be done." Elena paused, gathering her thoughts. The square had grown quiet around them, with more people stopping to listen to this unusual conversation. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Elena continued. "I'm not asking to be given anything I haven't earned. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that I can serve my country as effectively as any man. If I can't meet the standards, then dismiss me. But don't dismiss me before I've had the chance to try.
Colonel Volkov was quiet for a long moment.
Elena could see him processing her words, weighing them against his own experience and beliefs. Finally, he turned to Sergeant Kozlov. "What positions do we still need to fill?" the colonel asked. "Sir, we still need radio operators, field medics, and..." The sergeant paused, consulting his list. "We have one opening remaining in the sniper training program."
Elena's heart jumped.
She had learned to shoot as a child, taught by her grandfather who had been a hunter. She had always been naturally accurate, able to hit targets that challenged much more experienced shooters. But she had never imagined that skill might be useful in military service. "The sniper training program," Colonel Volkov mused, looking back at Elena.
"It's extremely demanding.
The physical requirements are substantial, the mental pressure is intense, and the failure rate is high.
Most recruits don't complete the program."
"What percentage complete it successfully?"
Elena asked.
"Approximately 30% of male recruits," the colonel replied.
"We've never trained a female sniper." Elena felt the weight of that statement.
She would be not just joining the military, but potentially breaking new ground, setting a precedent that could affect other women who might want to serve their country in combat roles.
"Sir, if I may ask, what specifically makes the sniper program so difficult that 70% of men fail?"
The colonel smiled slightly, apparently appreciating the directness of her question.
"Physical endurance. Snipers often spend days in difficult conditions without moving.
Mental discipline, making precise shots under extreme stress while enemy forces try to kill you.
Patience, waiting hours or even days for the right opportunity.
And psychological resilience, taking a human life is not easy, even when that life belongs to an enemy who would gladly kill you and your countrymen."
Elena considered this carefully.
She thought about her childhood hunting trips with her grandfather, where she had learned to remain motionless for hours, waiting for deer to emerge from the forest. She thought about the focus required for precise shooting, the way her grandfather had taught her to control her breathing, her heartbeat, her thoughts. She thought about the mental strength she had developed helping to run her family's household, making difficult decisions and living with their consequences. "Sir, I believe I have the skills and temperament for sniper training," Elena said finally.
"I request permission to attempt the program." Sergeant Kozlov looked skeptical.
Other villagers who had gathered around were murmuring among themselves, their conversations a mixture of admiration, concern, and doubt. Elena could hear fragments of their words: "Too dangerous for a girl, not proper for a young lady, brave but foolish."
Colonel Volkov studied Elena for another long moment.
Then, he made a decision that would change everything. "Very well, Elena Petrov. Report to the military transport at dawn tomorrow morning. You'll travel with the other recruits to the training facility.
If you complete the program successfully, you'll be assigned to a combat unit.
If you fail, you'll be transferred to support duties."
Are these terms acceptable?
Elena felt her heart racing, but her voice remained steady.
"Yes, sir. Thank you for this opportunity." As Colonel Volkov turned away, Sergeant Kozlov leaned across the table toward Elena.
His expression wasn't hostile, but it wasn't particularly encouraging either.
"Miss Petrov, I hope you understand what you're getting yourself into. Military life isn't like civilian life.
The training is brutal, the conditions are harsh, and combat is..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Combat is hell."
"Are you absolutely certain about this decision?"
Elena looked around the square at her village, at the people she had grown up with, at the familiar buildings and streets that made up her world. Then, she thought about German forces moving across the countryside, destroying villages just like this one, killing families just like hers. The choice, when she looked at it that way, wasn't really a choice at all.
"Sergeant, I'm certain." That evening, Elena sat with her family around their kitchen table.
The news of her enlistment had spread quickly through the village, and her parents had spent the afternoon processing the reality that their eldest daughter would be leaving for military service. Mikhail Petrov sat quietly, his work-hardened hands folded on the wooden table. He was a man who believed in duty and service, but he was also a father who worried about his children. Anna Petrov moved around the kitchen, preparing what might be Elena's last home-cooked meal for months, her movements quick and nervous.
Elena, her father said finally, are you sure this is what you want? There's no shame in changing your mind. No one would think less of you.
Elena reached across the table and placed her hand over his.
Papa, this is what I need to do. For all of us.
Victor, who had been unusually quiet since witnessing his sister's confrontation with the military officers, suddenly spoke up.
Elena, what if something happens to you?
What if you get hurt, or worse? Elena turned to her younger brother, seeing in his eyes the same mix of admiration and fear that she had seen in her parents' faces all evening.
Victor, what if I don't go, and something happens to all of you?
What if the Germans come here, and I could have done something to stop them, but I was too scared to try? She stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the village streets she had walked her entire life.
I've thought about this all day.
I've imagined staying here, staying safe, while other people fight for our freedom.
And I can't live with that.
I can't be the person who lets others take all the risks while I hide. Anna Petrov finally spoke, her voice soft but clear.
My daughter, I'm proud of you. And I'm terrified for you.
Both of those things are true, and both of those things are right.
Elena turned back to her family, these people she loved more than anything in the world.
Tomorrow she would begin a journey that would test every aspect of her character, her skills, and her determination. She would face mockery, skepticism, and challenges that would push her beyond what she thought possible. But tonight, in her family's kitchen, surrounded by the people who knew her best, Elena Petrov felt ready to prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are exactly the heroes the world needs most. The military transport truck bounced and jolted along the rough country road, its canvas-covered bed packed with 23 young men and 1 young woman. Elena sat near the tailgate, her small canvas bag clutched in her lap, trying to ignore the stares and whispered conversations of her fellow recruits. The September morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine forests and the promise of the harsh winter that lay ahead. Most of the men in the truck had introduced themselves during the first hour of the journey, sharing stories about their hometowns, their families, and their reasons for joining the military. Elena had participated in these conversations, but she could sense the underlying current of skepticism and curiosity that surrounded her presence. She wasn't offended, she understood that her situation was unusual, and that these young men were simply trying to make sense of something they had never encountered before.
Dmitry Volkov, a barrel-chested farm worker from a village 50 kilometers east of Bila Tserkva, had been particularly vocal about his doubts. Not maliciously, but with the kind of blunt honesty that came naturally to someone who had spent his life working with his hands and speaking his mind. Elena, Dmitry said as the truck hit another pothole, sending all the passengers bouncing, I don't mean any disrespect, but have you really thought about what sniper training involves? It's not just shooting targets at a country fair. Elena looked at Dmitry calmly. He was probably 25 years old, with the thick muscles and weathered skin of someone who had spent years hauling hay bales and wrestling farm equipment. His concern seemed genuine rather than dismissive. Dmitry, what do you think sniper training involves? Elena asked. Well, Dmitry began, clearly pleased to have his expertise recognized. My cousin served in the army before the war. He told me that snipers have to crawl through mud for hours, carry heavy equipment for kilometers, and stay perfectly still in freezing cold while enemy soldiers try to hunt them down. And that's before they even start shooting. Several other recruits nodded in agreement. Ivan Petrovich, a thin young man with wire-rimmed glasses who had worked as a clerk in a government office, added his own concerns. And the psychological pressure, Ivan said quietly. Taking a human life isn't like hunting deer or rabbits. It changes you. My father fought in the Great War, and he said that killing another person leaves marks on your soul that never completely heal. Elena listened to these concerns without defensiveness or anger. These men weren't trying to discourage her out of malice, they were sharing genuine worries based on their own understanding of what lay ahead. She appreciated their honesty, and she knew that her response would help establish how they viewed her throughout the training period. You're both right, Elena said. The physical demands will be extreme, and the psychological challenges will be difficult.
But, consider this: women have been dealing with physical hardship and life and death decisions for centuries. We deliver babies in conditions that would break many men. We work 18-hour days keeping families fed and clothed and healthy. We make decisions every day that affect whether the people we love live or die. Elena paused, looking around at the faces of her fellow recruits. She could see that her words were having an impact, causing them to think about women's experiences in ways they hadn't considered before. As for the psychological aspects, Elena continued, women protect their children from threats every day. If someone threatened your mother or sister or daughter, wouldn't you expect her to fight back with everything she had? This is the same principle, just applied on a larger scale. Dmitri scratched his head thoughtfully. I never thought about it that way, he admitted. My mother once fought off a wolf that was threatening our chickens. Used nothing but a wooden rake and pure determination. That wolf was twice her size, but it ran away. The conversation continued as the truck rolled through the countryside, but Elena noticed a subtle shift in tone. The men weren't questioning whether she belonged there, they were beginning to wonder how she would handle the specific challenges ahead. It was a small but significant change, moving from skepticism about her presence to curiosity about her performance. The training facility appeared in the late afternoon, emerging from the forest like something from another world. Elena had expected a military base, but this was something more specialized and more intense. High wooden fences topped with barbed wire surrounded a complex of simple wooden buildings. Guard towers stood at each corner, manned by soldiers with serious expressions and automatic weapons. The entire installation radiated an atmosphere of disciplined efficiency and deadly purpose. As the truck passed through the main gate, Elena caught her first glimpse of the training grounds. Obstacle courses stretched across cleared fields, with walls to climb, trenches to crawl through, and rope bridges spanning muddy pits. Firing ranges extended into the distance, marked by earthen berms and wooden target frames. In one area, she could see recruits engaged in hand-to-hand combat training, their shouts and grunts audible even over the rumble of the truck's engine. The truck stopped in front of a long, low building that looked like a military barracks. A sergeant emerged from the building's main entrance, his uniform crisp and his bearing suggesting someone accustomed to absolute authority. This was Sergeant Major Alexei Kazenko, though the recruits wouldn't learn his name for several hours yet. Out of the truck, the sergeant major barked. Line up in front of me. Move with purpose. Elena and the other recruits scrambled out of the truck bed, grabbing their bags and attempting to form something resembling a military formation. Elena found herself standing between Dmitri and Ivan, trying to match their posture and bearing while fighting down the nervousness that threatened to overwhelm her. Sergeant Major Kazenko walked slowly along the line of recruits, examining each one with the intense scrutiny of someone evaluating livestock at a market. He was probably 40 years old, with iron-gray hair and scars on his hands and face that spoke of real combat experience. When he stopped in front of Elena, his examination was particularly thorough. Name, the sergeant major commanded. Elena Petrov, sir. Speak up. I can't hear whispers on a battlefield. Elena Petrov, sir. Elena repeated, projecting her voice with all the strength she could manage. Sergeant Major Kazenko stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he moved on to the next recruit, continuing his inspection without comment. Elena wasn't sure whether his silence was a good sign or a bad one. When the sergeant major had examined every recruit, he positioned himself in front of the formation and began what Elena would later recognize as his standard welcoming speech. Welcome to sniper training, Sergeant Major Kazenko announced, his voice carrying clearly across the formation. For the next 6 weeks, this facility will be your home, your school, your workplace, and your testing ground. Some of you will succeed. Most of you will fail. Those who succeed will become some of the most effective soldiers in the Soviet Army. Those who fail will be transferred to other duties, hopefully having learned something about yourselves in the process. The sergeant major began pacing back and forth in front of the recruits, his movements precise and controlled. Sniper training is not just about shooting, he continued. Anyone can learn to hit a target at a reasonable distance with enough practice. Snipers must be able to hit specific targets at extreme distances, under terrible conditions, while under enemy fire, after days without adequate food or sleep, and while dealing with the knowledge that missing their shot might result in the deaths of their comrades. Elena felt her stomach tighten as the sergeant major outlined the challenges ahead. She had expected difficult training, but the reality was beginning to sink in that she was preparing for situations that would test every aspect of her character and capabilities. Furthermore, Sergeant Major Kazenko said, snipers often work alone or in very small teams. You cannot rely on the support and encouragement of a large unit. You must be self-sufficient, mentally tough, and absolutely reliable. Your fellow soldiers will depend on you in ways that you probably cannot yet imagine. The sergeant major stopped pacing and faced the formation directly. The training program has 5 phases. Physical conditioning, where we will determine whether your bodies can handle the demands of sniper operations. Marksmanship, where we will teach you to shoot more accurately than you ever imagined possible. Fieldcraft, where you will learn to move invisibly through enemy territory. Tactical training, where you will learn to think like a sniper and plan sniper operations. And, finally, live-fire exercises, where you will put all of your skills together under simulated combat conditions. Elena noticed that several recruits were shifting nervously as the sergeant major described the training program. The scope and intensity of what lay ahead was clearly intimidating, even for young men who had considered themselves tough and capable. Each phase will eliminate recruits who cannot meet the standards, the sergeant major continued. This is not a reflection of your worth as human beings or even as soldiers. But sniper work requires specific capabilities, and those who lack these capabilities will find other ways to serve their country. Sergeant Major Kazenko's gaze swept across the formation one more time, pausing briefly on Elena before moving on. You will be awakened at dawn tomorrow to begin physical conditioning. Tonight, you will be assigned to barracks, issued equipment, and given your first meal. Use this time to rest and prepare mentally for what lies ahead. Dismissed. The recruits scattered toward the barracks building, their conversations subdued and thoughtful. Elena found herself walking alongside Ivan Petrovich, who seemed as nervous as she felt. Elena, Ivan said quietly, are you worried about the physical conditioning? I'm worried about it, and I'm a man. Elena considered the question carefully. She was worried about the physical demands, but not in the way that Ivan probably assumed. Ivan, I'm worried about different things than you are, Elena replied. You're probably worried about whether you're strong enough or fast enough. I'm worried about whether the training is designed specifically for men's bodies and capabilities, which would put me at a disadvantage regardless of my actual fitness level. Ivan looked puzzled. What do you mean? Well, Elena explained, if the physical tests are based on male physical characteristics, upper body strength, for example, then I might fail not because I'm not fit enough to be a sniper, but because I'm being measured against the wrong standards. They reached the barracks building, where a corporal was directing recruits to their sleeping assignments. Elena was pleased to discover that she had been assigned a small private room rather than being placed in the open barracks with the male recruits. It was a small consideration, but it suggested that the military leadership had given some thought to the practical aspects of training a female soldier. Elena's room was spartanly furnished with a narrow bed, a wooden chest for her belongings, and a small desk with a single chair. A window looked out over one of the training fields, where she could see the obstacle course that would soon become intimately familiar. She unpacked her few possessions, hanging up her spare clothing and placing her personal items in the wooden chest. As evening approached, the recruits gathered in a mess hall for their first meal at the training facility. The food was simple but adequate: black bread, vegetable soup, and chunks of beef that were tough but flavorful. Elena noticed that the mess hall conversations were quieter and more serious than those in the transport truck. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in for everyone. Dmitri sat across from Elena at one of the long wooden tables, his earlier jovial demeanor replaced by a more thoughtful expression. Elena, Dmitri said, keeping his voice low, I've been thinking about what you said in the truck, about women dealing with hardship and life and death decisions. You're right about that. But this is different. This is about intentionally putting yourself in situations where people will be trying to kill you.
Elena nodded, appreciating Dimitri's continued honesty. You're right, it is different.
But, Dimitri, consider this: if I fail here, if I can't handle the training or the combat, then I get transferred to support duties. I'll still be serving my country, just in a different role. But, if I succeed, then I become someone who can protect soldiers like you when you're in danger.
Isn't that worth the risk?
Their conversation was interrupted by the entrance of Sergeant Major Kazenko, who strode into the mess hall with his characteristic purposeful bearing. The room fell silent as all the recruits turned their attention to him. Tomorrow morning, physical conditioning begins at dawn, the sergeant major announced. You will be awakened at 5 o'clock. You will have 30 minutes to dress, make your beds, and report to the training field.
Anyone who is late will be eliminated from the program immediately. Anyone who fails to complete the physical conditioning requirements will be eliminated from the program immediately. Anyone who complains, argues, or creates disruptions will be eliminated from the program immediately. The sergeant major paused, letting his words sink in. Get a good night's sleep, he added with what might have been the ghost of a smile. It will be the last full night's rest you have for the next 6 weeks.
As the recruits filed out of the mess hall and returned to their barracks, Elena felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension that kept her awake long past the official lights-out time. Through her window, she could see the obstacle course silhouetted against the starry sky, and she tried to imagine herself climbing those walls, crawling through those trenches, and meeting whatever challenges the training instructors could devise. She thought about her family back in Bielotserkva, probably sitting around their kitchen table and wondering how their daughter was adapting to military life. She thought about the German forces advancing across Eastern Europe, destroying everything in their path and moving closer to the villages and people she loved. And she thought about the opportunity she had been given, the chance to become someone who could make a real difference in the fight for her country's survival. Tomorrow, Elena Petrov would begin the process of becoming a sniper. Tonight, she was still the seamstress's daughter who had volunteered for military service because she believed in doing what was right rather than what was easy. By morning, that person would begin to transform into someone harder, more capable, and more dangerous than she had ever imagined possible. The alarm that shattered Elena's sleep at 5 o'clock in the morning sounded like the end of the world. She bolted upright in her narrow bed, her heart racing as the harsh metallic clanging echoed through the barracks building. Outside her window, the training field was still shrouded in pre-dawn darkness, with only the faint glow of distant electric lights marking the boundaries of the facility. Elena's feet hit the cold wooden floor, and she immediately began the 30-minute routine that would become as automatic as breathing over the next 6 weeks. Uniform on, bed made with military precision, personal items secured, and then, a quick splash of freezing water on her face from the basin in her room. Around her, she could hear the sounds of 23 other recruits going through similar preparations, their movements hurried but careful. When she emerged from her room, Elena found the other recruits gathering in the hallway, their faces showing the same mixture of nervousness and determination that she felt. Dimitri looked like he hadn't slept much, and Ivan appeared to be fighting off panic. Several of the younger recruits looked like they were questioning their decision to volunteer for sniper training. How do you think they'll start the physical conditioning? Whispered Boris Fedorov, a blacksmith's son whose massive hands and shoulders suggested he was accustomed to heavy physical labor. Probably running, replied Mikhail Stepanov, who had been a track athlete in his hometown before the war. Running until someone collapses, then running some more. Elena listened to these speculations without contributing her own guesses. She had learned over the years that worrying about what might happen was less productive than simply preparing to handle whatever actually did happen. But, as she followed the group of recruits toward the main entrance of the barracks, she found herself thinking about her grandfather's hunting lessons and wondering if anything she had learned in her civilian life would be useful in military training. Sergeant Major Kazenko was waiting outside the barracks, standing at attention despite the early hour and the cold morning air. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his posture erect, and his expression suggested that dawn was his favorite time of day. Behind him, Elena could see several other instructors, all of them wearing the same expression of professional competence and barely contained anticipation. Form up, the sergeant major commanded. 2 lines. Move with purpose.
The recruits scrambled into formation, Elena finding herself in the front row next to Ivan and Boris.
The morning air was sharp in her lungs, and she could see her breath forming small clouds as she tried to control her nervousness.
Physical conditioning, Sergeant Major Kazenko announced, begins with a simple test.
You will run 5 kilometers as a group.
Anyone who falls behind will be eliminated. Anyone who stops running will be eliminated. Anyone who complains will be eliminated.
The course is marked with white flags.
Follow the flags, stay together, and don't quit. Elena felt her stomach tighten.
5 kilometers wasn't an impossible distance, but she had never run that far at military pace, wearing military boots, while trying to keep up with 23 men who probably had natural advantages in terms of leg length and muscle mass.
Begin, the sergeant major shouted.
The group of recruits started running, and Elena immediately realized that this was going to be more difficult than she had anticipated. The pace set by the lead runners was aggressive, and the uneven terrain of the training course made every step a challenge. Within the first kilometer, she was breathing hard and fighting to maintain her position in the group. Dmitri, running beside her, noticed her struggle.
Elena, he said between breaths, pace yourself. Don't try to keep up with the fastest runners. Focus on finishing.
Elena appreciated the advice, but she also understood something that Dmitri might not have considered. If she fell behind and finished last, or if she appeared to be struggling more than the male recruits, it would reinforce every assumption about women's physical capabilities. She needed to not just complete the run, she needed to complete it competitively.
The second kilometer took them through a section of forest, where the path was narrow and uneven.
Elena found that her smaller size and lower center of gravity actually gave her some advantages on this terrain. She was able to navigate between trees and around rocks more easily than some of the larger recruits, and she began to move up in the group ranking.
By the third kilometer, several recruits were beginning to show serious signs of fatigue.
Viktor Marchenko, a farmer's son who looked like he should have been one of the strongest runners, was falling behind and breathing heavily. Pavel Sasenko, who had boasted the night before about his athletic abilities, was struggling to maintain pace and occasionally stumbling on loose rocks. Elena, meanwhile, was finding her rhythm. Her grandfather's hunting expeditions had often involved hours of hiking through difficult terrain, and her daily work at home had given her a practical endurance that served her well in military training. She wasn't the fastest runner in the group, but she was consistent, and she wasn't slowing down. The fourth kilometer brought them back onto flat ground, where the instructors had set up what appeared to be checkpoints. As the recruits passed each checkpoint, Elena could see the instructors making notes on clipboards and studying individual performances with professional interest. Petrov called one of the instructors as Elena passed a checkpoint. "Maintain that pace." The encouragement surprised Elena, both because she hadn't expected individual attention and because the instructor's tone suggested approval rather than criticism. She realized that while she had been worried about falling behind, she had actually been performing better than many of her male counterparts. The fifth and final kilometer was the most challenging, involving a steep uphill section that tested everyone's remaining energy and determination. Elena could hear the breathing of the recruits around her becoming labored, and she could see that several men were close to their physical limits. Ivan, running beside her, was clearly struggling. His face was pale, his breathing ragged, and his usual steady pace had become uneven.
"Ivan," Elena said quietly, "stay with me.
Focus on the next 100 meters, not the whole distance." Elena found herself in the unexpected position of encouraging one of her male colleagues, helping him maintain the pace necessary to complete the run successfully. It was a reversal of what both of them had probably expected when the morning began. The finish line appeared ahead, marked by a large white banner stretched between two wooden posts.
Elena could see Sergeant Major Kazenko and the other instructors waiting, their clipboards ready to record finishing times and overall performance. More importantly, she could see that she was going to finish in the top half of the group, a performance that exceeded her own expectations and probably surprised everyone watching. Elena crossed the finish line with a time that placed her 8th out of 24 recruits. More significantly, she finished ahead of several men who had questioned her physical capabilities, and she appeared to be in better condition than many of the recruits who had finished behind her.
As the last few stragglers crossed the finish line, Sergeant Major Kazenko gathered the group for what would become his standard post-exercise evaluation.
Acceptable performance, the Sergeant Major announced, though his tone suggested that acceptable was the highest praise any of them were likely to receive. 3 recruits showed exceptional performance. 6 recruits showed adequate performance. 10 recruits showed marginal performance that will need to improve. 5 recruits showed inadequate performance.
Elena wondered which category she had been placed in, but she didn't have to wait long to find out.
Petrov, the Sergeant Major called.
Step forward.
Elena's heart jumped as she moved out of the formation.
Was this recognition for good performance, or had she somehow failed to meet the standards?
Recruit Petrov finished 8th overall and demonstrated consistent pace throughout the run, the Sergeant Major announced to the group. This represents the standard that all recruits should strive to achieve.
Elena felt a mixture of pride and relief, but she also noticed the expressions on some of the other recruits' faces. A few looked surprised, some appeared impressed, and others seemed to be re-evaluating their assumptions about what she might be capable of. After the morning run, the recruits were given 30 minutes for breakfast and, then, immediately moved to the next phase of physical conditioning, obstacle course training. The obstacle course that Elena had observed from her barracks window the night before was even more intimidating up close. Wooden walls 12 feet high, cargo nets stretched between tall poles, trenches filled with muddy water, and rope bridges spanning gaps that looked impossibly wide. At the far end of the course, she could see a series of targets that presumably represented the final challenge. Lieutenant Pavel Kuznetsov, a compact man with the build of someone who had spent years mastering physical challenges, explained the obstacle course requirements.
Each obstacle must be completed in sequence, Lieutenant Kuznetsov announced. Anyone who fails to complete an obstacle will repeat that obstacle until successful or until eliminated from the program. Anyone who helps another recruit will be eliminated. Anyone who takes shortcuts will be eliminated.
Elena studied the course carefully, trying to develop a strategy for each obstacle. The wooden walls would require upper body strength that she might not possess, but they also had rope handholds that could be used for leverage. The cargo nets would favor lighter recruits who could climb efficiently rather than powering through with brute strength. The muddy trenches would be about endurance and determination rather than raw physical capability. Begin! Lieutenant Kuznetsov commanded. The first obstacle was a 12-foot wooden wall with minimal handholds. Elena watched as several recruits struggled with different approaches, some trying to power over the wall with upper body strength, others attempting to find footholds in the rough wood. When Elena's turn came, she used an approach her grandfather had taught her for climbing trees. Instead of trying to pull herself over the wall, she used her feet to walk up the wooden surface while using her hands primarily for balance and leverage. It wasn't the fastest technique, but it was efficient and allowed her to clear the obstacle without exhausting herself for later challenges. The cargo net obstacle favored Elena's lighter build and natural agility. She was able to climb quickly and efficiently, actually passing 2 larger recruits who had started before her. As she reached the top of the net, she could hear Lieutenant Kuznetsov calling out encouragement. "Good technique, Petrov. Maintain that efficiency." The muddy trench obstacle was the most unpleasant part of the course. Recruits had to crawl on their bellies through 50 meters of cold, muddy water while staying below a series of wires stretched 3 feet above the trench floor. Elena found that her smaller profile was an advantage here, allowing her to move more easily than recruits who had to squeeze their larger frames through the confined space. By the time Elena reached the rope bridge obstacle, she was covered in mud and breathing hard, but she was keeping pace with the best performers in the group. The rope bridge required careful balance and steady nerves as recruits crossed a gap 30 feet above a pit filled with muddy water. Elena approached the rope bridge methodically, testing each step and maintaining 3 points of contact at all times. Halfway across, she encountered Boris Fedorov, who had started before her but was frozen with fear in the middle of the bridge. "I can't move," Boris whispered, his face pale and his hands gripping the guide rope so tightly that his knuckles were white. Elena knew that helping Boris would result in her elimination from the program. But she also knew that leaving a fellow soldier in distress went against everything she believed about military service and personal honor.
Boris, Elena said quietly, look at me, not down at the water. Focus on my voice. Take one step, just one step. Elena couldn't physically help Boris across the bridge, but she could provide the encouragement and guidance that allowed him to overcome his fear and complete the obstacle himself. When they both reached the other side, Boris looked at Elena with an expression of profound gratitude. Thank you, he said simply. Elena knew that Lieutenant Kuznetsov had probably observed the entire interaction, and she wondered if her moment of compassion would result in her elimination from the program. But, as she moved toward the final obstacle, she realized that she was comfortable with her decision. If helping a fellow soldier was grounds for elimination, then, perhaps this wasn't the program for her anyway. The final obstacle was a shooting challenge. Recruits had to hit 5 targets at various distances using standard military rifles, with each target representing a different type of shot that a sniper might encounter in combat conditions. Elena approached the shooting station with confidence for the first time all day. This was where her childhood hunting experience would be most valuable, and where she expected to demonstrate capabilities that would surprise her instructors and fellow recruits. The first target was a simple bullseye at 100 meters. Elena took her position behind the rifle, adjusted her breathing, and fired. Perfect center hit. The second target was smaller and at 150 meters. Another perfect hit. The third target was moving slowly from left to right at 200 meters. Elena led the target appropriately and scored another center hit. By the time Elena completed the shooting challenge with 5 perfect hits out of 5 attempts, a small crowd of instructors and other recruits had gathered to watch. Her performance was the best of the day, demonstrating a natural aptitude for precision shooting that clearly impressed everyone present. Sergeant Major Kazenko approached Elena as she finished the shooting exercise. His expression was unreadable, but Elena detected something that might have been approval in his manner. Recruit Petrov, the sergeant major said, report to my office after evening meal. We need to discuss your training progression. Elena spent the rest of the day wondering whether she was being called to the sergeant major's office for exceptional performance or for helping Boris on the rope bridge. When evening finally arrived, she knocked on the door of the small building that housed the senior instructor's offices. Enter, came the sergeant major's voice from inside. Elena stepped into the office, which was spartanly furnished with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered with military maps and training schedules. Sergeant Major Kazenko gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk. Recruit Petrov, the sergeant major began, your performance today was noteworthy in several respects. Your run time placed you in the top third of the group. Your obstacle course completion was efficient and demonstrated good tactical thinking. Your shooting performance was exceptional. Elena waited, uncertain whether this was leading to praise or criticism. However, the sergeant major continued, you provided assistance to another recruit during the rope bridge obstacle. This could be grounds for elimination. Elena's heart sank. She had known this moment might come, but she had hoped that her overall performance might outweigh her decision to help Boris. Sir, Elena said, I understand the regulations. But I couldn't leave a fellow soldier in distress when I could help him succeed. Sergeant Major Kazenko studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Recruit Petrov, the rope bridge obstacle isn't just about individual performance. It's about leadership, judgment, and the willingness to help fellow soldiers succeed. You provided assistance in a way that didn't violate the spirit of the exercise, and you helped another recruit overcome his fears rather than simply doing the work for him. Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. Furthermore, the sergeant major continued, your shooting performance suggests that you have exceptional natural aptitude for sniper work. I'm recommending that you be moved directly to advanced marksmanship training, skipping the intermediate shooting program. Elena could hardly believe what she was hearing. Instead of being eliminated, she was being advanced ahead of schedule. Sir, thank you for this opportunity. I won't disappoint you. Sergeant Major Kazenko's expression grew serious. Recruit Petrov, the advanced training will be more difficult than anything you've experienced so far.
You'll be working with live ammunition, training under simulated combat conditions, and preparing for actual sniper operations. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Elena thought about her village, her family, and the German forces advancing across Eastern Europe. She thought about the opportunity to make a real difference in the fight for her country's survival.
Yes, sir. I'm ready.
The advanced marksmanship training facility existed in a different world from the basic training course Elena had just completed. Located in a secluded valley 30 kilometers from the main training base, it consisted of sophisticated shooting ranges, specialized equipment workshops, and living quarters designed for small groups of elite trainees. When Elena arrived there on a cold October morning, she discovered that she was one of only 8 recruits selected for the advanced program. The other 7 trainees were all men, all veterans of the basic training course, and all individuals who had demonstrated exceptional shooting abilities during their initial instruction.
Elena quickly learned their names and backgrounds during the first evening meal at the facility.
There was Sergei Volkov, a former hunter from the Ural Mountains whose steady hands and patient temperament made him a natural sniper. Viktor Denisov had been a competitive marksman before the war and could consistently hit targets that other shooters couldn't even see clearly. Alexei Markov was a factory worker whose mechanical understanding of firearms allowed him to maintain and modify weapons with remarkable precision. The other 4 men, Pavel, Boris, Mikhail, and Yuri, each brought their own specialized skills and experiences to the group. What surprised Elena was how quickly and naturally they accepted her presence among them. Perhaps because they had all survived the elimination process that had reduced the original 24 recruits to this elite group, they were more focused on individual capability than on gender differences. Captain Ivan Fedorov, the commanding officer of the advanced training program, was unlike any military instructor Elena had previously encountered. He was probably 35 years old, with the lean build of someone who had spent years in the field, and his left hand bore visible scars from what appeared to be combat injuries. During his introductory briefing, Captain Fedorov spoke to the 8 trainees as if they were already soldiers rather than recruits. "Welcome to advanced sniper training," Captain Fedorov began. "You are here because you have demonstrated exceptional shooting ability and the mental discipline necessary for sniper operations. Over the next 4 weeks, we will transform you from good shooters into precision weapons." Captain Fedorov moved to a large map mounted on the wall of the briefing room, pointing to various locations marked with colored pins. "Snipers operate differently from other soldiers," the captain explained. "Infantry soldiers fight as part of large units, with immediate support from their comrades.
Tank crews work as coordinated teams inside heavily armored vehicles. Artillery operators fire from secure positions far behind the front lines.
Snipers work alone or in pairs, deep in enemy territory, with nothing but their skills and equipment to keep them alive." Elena felt her pulse quicken as she contemplated the reality of what Captain Fedorov was describing. She had known intellectually that sniper work involved operating independently in dangerous situations, but the captain's words made the risks and responsibilities much more concrete. "Your training will focus on 4 primary areas," Captain Fedorov continued. "Advanced marksmanship, including extreme-range shooting and shooting under adverse conditions. Fieldcraft, including camouflage, stalking, and survival skills. Intelligence gathering, including target identification and battlefield assessment. And psychological preparation, including decision-making under stress and dealing with the mental aspects of taking human lives." Elena noticed that Captain Fedorov's manner was matter-of-fact rather than dramatic when he discussed killing enemy soldiers. She appreciated this approach because it treated the psychological challenges as professional requirements rather than emotional obstacles. The first week of advanced training focused intensively on marksmanship skills that went far beyond anything Elena had previously experienced. While basic training had taught recruits to hit targets at standard infantry ranges, advanced training pushed them to engage targets at distances where atmospheric conditions, wind patterns, and even the curvature of the Earth affected bullet trajectory. Elena's first advanced shooting lesson took place on a range that extended nearly a kilometer into the distance. Captain Fedorov personally supervised her initial attempts at extreme-range shooting, providing instruction that was both technical and practical. "Elena," Captain Fedorov said as he adjusted the telescopic sight on her rifle,
shooting at 800 meters isn't just about aiming and pulling the trigger. At this distance, you must calculate wind speed and direction, atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, and the exact range to your target. A small error in any of these calculations will result in a complete miss. Elena peered through the telescope sight at a target so distant it appeared as little more than a speck against the hillside. The mathematical precision required for this type of shooting appealed to the part of her mind that enjoyed solving complex problems, but the physical demands were unlike anything she had experienced. "Take your first shot," Captain Fedorov instructed. "Don't worry about hitting the target. Focus on your breathing, your trigger control, and maintaining perfect stillness during the shot." Elena settled into the shooting position, trying to absorb all the technical instruction she had received while maintaining the natural shooting instincts that had served her well throughout basic training. She controlled her breathing, lined up the crosshairs as precisely as possible, and gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck the hillside approximately 2 meters to the left of the target and 1 meter low. "Excellent first attempt," Captain Fedorov said, much to Elena's surprise. "You missed the target, but your shot group was consistent, and your basic technique is sound. Now we'll teach you to calculate the adjustments necessary to hit targets at this range." Over the following days, Elena learned to use weather instruments to measure wind speed and direction, mathematical formulas to calculate bullet drop over long distances, and specialized equipment to determine exact ranges to distant targets. More importantly, she learned to make these calculations quickly and accurately while maintaining the concentration necessary for precision shooting. By the end of the first week, Elena was consistently hitting targets at 800 meters, and Captain Fedorov was introducing her to even more challenging shooting scenarios. Targets that moved unpredictably, targets partially concealed behind cover, targets visible for only brief moments, and targets that had to be engaged while Elena herself was in awkward or unstable shooting positions. The second week introduced fieldcraft training, which Elena found both fascinating and exhausting. Under the instruction of Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Korolev, a veteran sniper who had already completed several combat missions, the trainees learned to move invisibly through enemy territory and to remain hidden while conducting observations or preparing for shots. Elena discovered that camouflage was much more complex than simply wearing clothing that matched the surrounding environment. Effective concealment required understanding how human vision worked, how to break up recognizable shapes and patterns, and how to avoid creating shadows or reflections that might reveal a hidden position. Elena, Senior Lieutenant Korolev said during one camouflage exercise, "Your smaller size is actually an advantage in fieldcraft. You require less cover to remain hidden, and you can use concealment positions that would be impossible for larger soldiers." The lieutenant positioned Elena in a patch of forest and challenged her to remain undetected while he and the other trainees searched for her position. Elena used techniques her grandfather had taught her for hunting, combined with the military camouflage principles she was learning, to create a hiding place that proved remarkably effective. After 20 minutes of searching, Senior Lieutenant Korolev called off the exercise without locating Elena's position. When she emerged from her concealment, the other trainees were amazed to discover that she had been hiding less than 50 meters from where they had been searching. "Outstanding fieldcraft," the lieutenant commented. "You have natural instincts for this type of work." Elena found that she genuinely enjoyed the intellectual challenges of fieldcraft. Planning routes through enemy territory required the same kind of problem-solving skills she had used in civilian life, while executing those plans demanded physical skills and mental discipline she was still developing. The third week of training focused on intelligence gathering and target identification. Elena learned to use military maps and aerial photographs to plan sniper operations, to identify high-value enemy targets based on uniform details and behavioral patterns, and to collect battlefield information that could be useful to larger military units. Captain Fedorov emphasized that snipers were often in positions to observe enemy activities that were invisible to other types of soldiers, making accurate intelligence reporting a crucial part of their mission. "Elena," Captain Fedorov said during one intelligence exercise, "observe this photograph and tell me what you can determine about enemy force composition and capabilities." Elena studied the aerial photograph carefully, looking for details that might reveal information about the enemy unit.
vehicle types, antenna configurations, defensive positions, and personnel behavior all provided clues about what kind of military unit was operating in the area. "Sir, based on the vehicle types and communication equipment, this appears to be a headquarters unit rather than a frontline combat unit," Elena replied. "The defensive positions are oriented toward the west, suggesting they expect threats from that direction. The personnel in the photograph appear to be officers rather than enlisted soldiers, based on their uniforms and behavior." Captain Fedorov nodded approvingly. "Excellent analysis. This type of intelligence gathering can be as valuable as eliminating enemy soldiers with precision shots." Elena found herself particularly skilled at intelligence work. Her attention to detail and ability to recognize patterns made her naturally effective at extracting useful information from complex battlefield situations. The fourth and final week of advanced training dealt with the psychological aspects of sniper operations, including decision-making under extreme stress and coping with the mental challenges of taking human lives in combat. Elena had been dreading this part of the training, not because she was unwilling to engage enemy soldiers, but because she was uncertain how she would react to killing another human being. Captain Fedorov's approach to this sensitive topic was both professional and compassionate. "Elena," Captain Fedorov said during a private counseling session, "many soldiers struggle with the psychological aspects of killing enemy personnel. This is normal and doesn't indicate weakness or unsuitability for combat duty. What matters is your ability to function effectively despite these psychological challenges." Captain Fedorov explained that successful snipers learn to view their targets as military objectives rather than as individual human beings, at least during combat operations. This psychological distancing allowed them to perform their duties effectively while preserving their mental health and moral compass. "The enemy soldiers you will engage are part of a military force that is trying to destroy your country, kill your family, and enslave your people," the captain explained. "When you eliminate enemy personnel, you are protecting innocent civilians and fellow soldiers who depend on your skills for their survival." Elena found this perspective helpful, but she also realized that the true test of her psychological readiness would come only when she faced actual combat situations. During the final week of training, Elena participated in live-fire exercises that simulated real combat conditions as closely as possible without actually engaging enemy forces. These exercises combined all the skills she had learned: extreme range shooting, fieldcraft, intelligence gathering, and stress management into integrated scenarios that tested her overall capabilities as a sniper. The final exercise took place over 3 days and required Elena to penetrate a simulated enemy position, identify high-value targets, and eliminate specific personnel while avoiding detection by opposing forces. Success required perfect execution of every aspect of her training. Elena began the exercise before dawn on a cold November morning, carrying only her rifle, a minimal amount of food and water, and the specialized equipment necessary for her mission. The target area was located 15 kilometers from her starting position and was defended by instructors and advanced trainees playing the role of enemy forces. The first day involved reaching a position where she could observe the target area without being detected. Elena used the fieldcraft technique she had mastered to move carefully through forest and farmland, avoiding roads and obvious routes that might be monitored by opposing forces. By evening, Elena had reached an observation position that provided clear views of the target area while keeping her concealed from enemy detection. She spent the night conducting surveillance and gathering intelligence about enemy force composition, defensive positions, and patrol patterns. The second day required Elena to identify specific high-value targets based on intelligence briefings she had received before the exercise began. Using her telescopic sight and intelligence training, she observed enemy personnel and successfully identified 3 target individuals based on their uniforms, equipment, and behavior patterns. The third day was the culmination of the entire exercise. Elena had to engage her assigned targets with precision shots while avoiding detection and elimination by opposing forces. Success required perfect shooting under realistic stress conditions. Elena's first target was an enemy officer located approximately 600 meters from her shooting position. The shot required careful calculation of wind conditions and bullet trajectory, executed while maintaining perfect concealment from other enemy personnel in the area. Elena controlled her breathing, made her final calculations, and slowly squeezed the trigger.
The practice round struck the target perfectly, and the enemy officer raised a white flag to indicate that the shot would have been fatal in real combat. Her second target was more challenging, an enemy communications specialist located 750 meters away and partially concealed behind cover. Elena had to wait for the right moment when the target was visible and the shot was possible. After 30 minutes of patient observation, Elena saw her opportunity. The target moved into an exposed position for approximately 10 seconds, and Elena made a perfect shot that would have eliminated a crucial enemy capability. The third and final target was the most difficult of the exercise. An enemy commander located nearly 900 meters away, visible only briefly at irregular intervals, and surrounded by other personnel who would immediately react to any shooting. Elena spent an hour studying the target's movement patterns and identifying the optimal shooting opportunity. When her moment came, she had less than 5 seconds to acquire the target, calculate the shot, and fire accurately. The shot was perfect. At 900 meters, under realistic stress conditions, Elena demonstrated the precision and mental discipline that defined elite sniper capabilities. When the exercise concluded, Captain Fedorov personally congratulated Elena on her performance. "Elena," Captain Fedorov said, "your performance during this training cycle has been exceptional. You have demonstrated shooting accuracy, fieldcraft skills, intelligence capabilities, and psychological resilience that meet the highest standards of sniper operations." Elena felt a deep sense of accomplishment, but also a sobering awareness of the responsibilities that lay ahead. "Sir, what happens next?" Elena asked. Captain Fedorov's expression grew serious. "Next, you receive your operational assignment. The front lines need experienced snipers immediately. Within the week, you'll be deployed to an active combat zone where your training will be put to the ultimate test." Elena nodded, understanding that her real education as a sniper was just beginning. Everything she had learned during training was preparation for the moment when she would face actual enemy forces under real combat conditions. That night, Elena lay in her bunk thinking about the journey that had brought her to this point. 4 months earlier, she had been a seamstress's daughter hanging laundry behind her family's cottage. Now she was a fully trained military sniper, preparing to deploy to the front lines of the war that was tearing Europe apart. Elena thought about her family, her village, and the people depending on soldiers like her to protect them from destruction. She thought about the German forces advancing across her homeland, confident in their superior numbers and equipment. Tomorrow, Elena Petrov would begin the journey that would make her one of the most feared snipers in the Soviet army. Tonight, she was ready to prove that the girl they had mocked was about to become their most dangerous enemy. The German advance had stalled 15 kilometers west of Orel, creating a deadly stalemate that had persisted for 3 brutal weeks. Winter was approaching fast, and both armies were desperately trying to secure advantageous positions before the harsh Russian cold made large-scale military operations impossible. For the German forces, this meant capturing the strategic rail junction at Orel, which would allow them to supply their armies throughout the winter campaign. For the Soviet defenders, it meant holding every meter of ground and making the Germans pay an impossibly high price for every advance. Elena arrived at the front lines on a gray December morning when the temperature was already below freezing and snow was beginning to fall. The journey from the training facility had taken 3 days, traveling in military convoys through countryside that showed the devastating effects of modern warfare. Burned villages, abandoned farmsteads, and the twisted metal remains of destroyed vehicles marked the path of the German advance. The Soviet defensive positions around Orel were unlike anything Elena had seen in training. Deep trenches connected concrete bunkers and artillery positions, while camouflaged observation posts provided overlapping fields of fire across the contested ground. The entire area buzzed with the controlled chaos of an army preparing for major combat operations. Elena reported to Colonel Pavel Marchenko, the senior commander responsible for sniper operations in the Orel defense sector. The colonel was a veteran of the previous war, with gray hair and tired eyes that reflected years of difficult decisions and heavy responsibilities. "Sergeant Petrov," Colonel Marchenko said, reviewing Elena's training records, "Captain Fedorov speaks very highly of your capabilities. However, frontline combat is different from training exercises. Are you prepared for the reality of killing enemy soldiers?" Elena had anticipated this question during her journey to the front. She had thought carefully about her motivations, her responsibilities, and her commitment to defending her country. "Sir, I'm prepared to engage enemy forces as required by my mission," Elena replied. "I understand the gravity of taking human lives, but I also understand that enemy soldiers are trying to destroy everything I'm sworn to protect." Colonel Marchenko studied Elena for a moment, apparently satisfied with her response. "Your operational area will be the northern sector, where German reconnaissance units have been probing our defenses," the colonel explained, pointing to a military map spread across his desk. "The enemy has been using sniper teams to eliminate our forward observers and communications personnel. Your mission is to counter these operations and provide overwatch for our infantry positions." Elena's assigned position was a camouflaged observation post built into the ruins of a bombed farmhouse, approximately 800 meters from the closest German positions. The post provided excellent visibility across the contested ground while offering multiple escape routes in case of enemy assault. Elena's spotter was Senior Sergeant Mikhail Volkov, a 40-year-old veteran who had served as an artillery observer before transitioning to sniper operations. Mikhail was exactly the kind of experienced soldier Elena needed as a partner, calm under pressure, tactically knowledgeable, and completely focused on mission accomplishment. "Elena," Mikhail said as they settled into their observation post, "the Germans have been active in this sector every day for the past week. They're good, well-trained, well-equipped, and aggressive. But they've gotten comfortable with their routine, and comfortable enemies make mistakes." Elena spent her first day in the position conducting detailed observation of German activities, learning enemy movement patterns, and identifying potential targets. Through her telescopic sight, she could see German soldiers moving between positions, conducting maintenance on equipment, and rotating personnel through forward positions. What struck Elena most forcefully was how normal and human the enemy soldiers appeared. They weren't the monsters described in Soviet propaganda, they were young men, probably not much older than herself, who laughed and talked and performed routine military duties just like Soviet soldiers. "Mikhail," Elena said quietly, "they look so ordinary." Mikhail nodded, understanding the psychological challenge Elena was confronting. "Elena, they are ordinary. They're sons and brothers and husbands, just like our soldiers. But they're also part of an army that's trying to destroy our country and kill our people. When they put on those uniforms and picked up those weapons, they became legitimate military targets." Elena appreciated Mikhail's honesty about the psychological complexity of combat operations. She realized that effective soldiers had to maintain their humanity while performing duties that required them to take human lives. On her second day in position, Elena observed a German sniper team setting up in a church bell tower approximately 1 kilometer from her position. The enemy snipers were systematically engaging Soviet communications personnel, disrupting defensive coordination and creating gaps in the defensive line. "Mikhail, German sniper team, church bell tower, range approximately 1,000 meters, Elena reported. Mikhail studied the target through his binoculars, calculating wind conditions and atmospheric factors that would affect a shot at that extreme range. "That's a challenging shot," Mikhail observed. "Long range, elevated target, variable wind conditions. But those snipers are causing significant problems for our defensive operations." Elena spent an hour studying the target, analyzing the German sniper's routine and identifying the optimal moment for engagement. The enemy team consisted of 2 soldiers, a shooter and a spotter, who alternated between observation and shooting positions according to a predictable pattern. When Elena's opportunity came, it lasted only seconds. The German sniper moved into firing position, presenting a clear target for approximately 10 seconds before he would disappear back into cover. Elena controlled her breathing, calculated her shot based on wind conditions and range estimates, and gently squeezed the trigger. The bullet traveled over 1 kilometer in less than 2 seconds, striking the German sniper in the center of his chest and eliminating him instantly. The German spotter immediately attempted to withdraw from the bell tower, but Elena had anticipated this reaction. Her second shot caught the spotter as he tried to flee, ending the threat to Soviet communications personnel. 2 confirmed kills, Mikhail reported over the radio. Enemy sniper team eliminated.
Elena felt a complex mixture of emotions as she observed the results of her shooting. Professional satisfaction at accomplishing her mission successfully, but also a sobering awareness that she had just taken 2 human lives. The training had prepared her technically for this moment, but the psychological reality was more challenging than any classroom instruction could convey. Over the following days, Elena's reputation began to spread throughout the Soviet defensive positions. Word passed among the soldiers that there was a female sniper in the northern sector who could hit targets at impossible ranges and eliminate enemy personnel with supernatural accuracy. Elena's third engagement involved a German artillery observer who had been directing devastating fire against Soviet positions. The observer was well concealed and protected, making him a difficult target that had frustrated previous attempts at elimination. Elena spent 2 days studying the target's behavior patterns and identifying a brief window of vulnerability when the observer emerged from cover to use his radio equipment. The shot required perfect timing and accuracy at 750 meters. When the opportunity came, Elena was ready. Her bullet struck the German observer exactly as he began to call in artillery coordinates, eliminating him and ending the immediate threat to Soviet defensive positions. By the end of her first week in combat, Elena had eliminated 8 enemy soldiers, including snipers, observers, and communications personnel whose deaths significantly disrupted German operations in the northern sector. But Elena's most significant test came on December 15, when German forces launched a major assault designed to break through Soviet defensive lines and capture the rail junction at Orel. The attack began before dawn with a massive artillery barrage that shook the ground and filled the air with smoke and debris. Elena and Mikhail remained in their observation post despite the bombardment, knowing that their position would be crucial for defending against the infantry assault that would follow. As the artillery fire shifted to targets deeper in the Soviet defensive zone, German infantry began advancing across the contested ground. Elena could see soldiers moving in small groups, using cover and concealment as they approached Soviet positions. "Elena, multiple targets advancing on our positions," Mikhail reported. "Priority targets are squad leaders and machine gun crews." Elena began engaging targets systematically, focusing on German soldiers whose elimination would have the greatest impact on the enemy assault. Her first target was a squad leader directing his men's advance from a position 400 meters away. Elena's shot eliminated him instantly, leaving his squad confused and vulnerable. Her second target was a machine gunner setting up a position that would have provided devastating fire support for the German advance. Elena's bullet struck him before he could open fire, preventing significant casualties among defending Soviet soldiers. As the